What's going on, guys? Sean Nalawani, SeanNal.com. And last week I put up a video discussing how to track progress during a bulking phase. I'll link that in the description box if you missed it. And today I'll be going over the other side of the equation by discussing how to track your progress during a cutting phase so that you can maximize your rate of fat loss while maintaining lean muscle and strength, possibly even gaining some, and while also keeping your hunger levels and your energy levels under control to make sure that you're actually able to stick to your cutting plan over the long term. There are actually a lot of similarities between tracking progress for bulking as well as for cutting. The same basic metrics are going to be used for both. The two most important ones to pay attention to are your changes in body weight and strength, and then you can use progress photos, measurements, and optionally body fat percentage readings to get some extra information that you can go by. So starting with body weight, a standard rate of overall weight loss to aim for during a cutting cycle for most people is going to be between 1 to 2 pounds per week. The vast majority, if not all of that, will be in the form of body fat if you're doing everything in your program correctly. You might see a faster initial drop of about 3 or 4 pounds in the first week or so while your body flushes out excess water retention, glycogen levels go down a bit, just the overall food volume in your system decreases, but it should stabilize somewhere in that 1 to 2 pound range after that. If you're carrying a more moderate amount of body fat, so I'd say below about 20% for men, about 28% for women, then you'll probably be closer to the 1 to 1.5 pound per week range, because as you get leaner, it does become more difficult to lose body fat. And if you're more on the overweight side, then a full 2 pounds would be possible, sometimes even up to around 3 pounds if you're significantly overweight, at least in the beginning stages of your program. But that will be fairly rare, and for most people, it's gonna land somewhere between 1 to 2 pounds per week. So to track this, you'll want to weigh yourself on a digital scale first thing in the morning, before eating and after using the washroom. It's important to keep the readings as consistent as possible each time, and then compare your average weight for the week to your average weight for the previous week, because keep in mind that your weight can fluctuate up and down quite a bit between any 2 individual days. And like I mentioned in the bulking video, you don't necessarily have to weigh yourself every single day, but at least every 2 to 3 days would be ideal. So as long as you're landing somewhere within that 1 to 2 pound range on a consistent basis, then you'll know that you have a proper calorie deficit in place for fat loss, and you can just continue on with your current approach until or unless your body weight plateaus. Now, if your body weight is decreasing at less than 1 pound per week, or if it's completely stagnant altogether, then that's gonna indicate that either your calorie deficit is too small or you don't even have a calorie deficit in place at all. And that would happen either because you've set your daily calorie intake too high, or your intake is set at the proper level, but you're accidentally overshooting that number without realizing it. So the first thing that I would recommend doing in this situation would be to conduct what I would call a dietary audit. So that's basically where you go through your entire diet piece by piece, making sure to properly track every single item you're consuming, okay? Every meal, every snack, every drink, cheat meal, everything, okay? Without skipping over anything. And that's gonna let you see what your calorie intake is truly set at. In most cases, in my experience, when people say that they can't lose fat even though they're following a low calorie diet, they're actually consuming far more calories throughout the week than they realize. This is an extremely common thing. When you're in a cutting phase, your hunger levels are automatically going to increase. It's a normal part of the process. It's something to expect, but that's going to make it a lot more likely that you'll unconsciously overeat. And when you consider that a standard calorie deficit for fat loss is usually only going to be about 350 to 500 calories below maintenance in most cases, all it really takes is a few errors throughout the day and the week to either hugely reduce your calorie deficit or eliminate it altogether. And also remember that it's your average calorie intake for the week as a whole that truly matters, rather than your intake between individual days. For example, if you ate 500 calories below maintenance from Monday to Friday, that's gonna be 2,500 calories below maintenance in total. But then you went and ate an extra 1,000 calories above maintenance on Saturday and Sunday as a way to reward yourself, most of your deficit will have gone to waste for the week. So if after auditing your diet, it turns out that you weren't actually hitting your calorie target as closely as you thought, then you'll just need to be more diligent with your dietary tracking from there on out. So start weighing out your foods with a scale to make sure that all of the measurements are being done correctly, and make sure that every single food and drink item is being accounted for during the day and during the week, and that any extra cheat meals or cheat days, everything that's included is being counted toward your calorie totals as well. On the other hand, if it turns out that you really have been consuming the calorie total that you plan to eat, then that just means that the actual calorie target itself is too high and that it doesn't represent a true calorie deficit for you. So in that case, you'll want to decrease your daily intake in increments of about 100 to 150 calories every 5 to 7 days or so until you're consistently landing in that 1 to 2 pound per week weight loss range. And if your weight plateaus again in the future, just apply that same process again. Also keep in mind that in addition to adjusting your calorie intake in order to create a proper calorie deficit, the other option is to increase your calorie expenditure, because calories in versus calories out is the ultimate bottom line here. So performing some additional activity during the week, whether it's an extra cardio session, maybe some additional walking throughout the day, or just any form of physical activity in general, that's another route that you can go to, especially if you aren't that active outside of weight training. And doing a combination of both at the same time, so eating a bit less and moving a bit more, that's an option too. It obviously takes a bigger time and energy investment to actively burn more calories as opposed to just consuming less. So adjusting your intake is usually the more efficient route. And it's the easier one to track as well. But if you've hit a point where you don't want to drop your food intake any lower, and this would especially apply if you're in the later stages of a cut and you're already eating at a fairly low calorie level, then you can go ahead and create the additional deficit through exercise instead. So that covers what to do if your body weight is decreasing at too slow a pace. And if it's dropping at too quick a pace, then it's basically just going to be the opposite approach. It would mean that your overall calorie deficit is too large and you'd want to increase your calorie intake or decrease your calorie expenditure or do a combination of both to get yourself back down to the proper level. Keep in mind though that if you are losing more than 2 pounds per week, but you feel fine in terms of your hunger, your energy, and your strength in the gym isn't dropping, then you should be fine for the time being. There's nothing inherently wrong with using a slightly more aggressive deficit, at least in the short term. But if hunger is an issue for you or you're feeling really physically drained, then you'll definitely want to decrease the size of your overall calorie deficit to help and offset that. And one other situation that you could find yourself in is where your body weight is decreasing at a slower pace, but you're clearly seeing improvements in body composition from week to week regardless of that. So maybe you're only losing like half a pound per week, but your waist measurement is consistently going down, your clothes are fitting better, and your levels of visible muscle definition are clearly improving from week to week. If that's the case, then there's a good chance that you're actually recompositioning, which means that you are losing fat, but you're also gaining some additional muscle mass at the same time. So your body is breaking down its fat stores, but it's using those calories to build muscle, in which case your overall body weight won't change as significantly as somebody who's mainly just losing body fat alone. If you do find yourself in this situation, which basically is the most favorable situation you could hope for during a cutting phase, then you can just leave your nutrition and your training as is for the time being. Just keep doing what you're doing and use the other progress tracking methods that I'll talk about here in a second to gauge your results, and only adjust your calories or your cardio if those other metrics start to plateau. So on that note, aside from your body weight, the other main progress tracking factor to pay attention to during a cut is your strength in the gym. Obviously, the main goal of a cutting phase is to lose body fat, but maintaining muscle or possibly even gaining some muscle, that should also be a primary goal as well. And the single best way to determine if you're doing this successfully is to monitor your changes in strength. The bottom line is that if your strength numbers in the gym are continuing to increase from week to week, or at the very least they're staying the same, and the rest of your program is otherwise properly structured in terms of your training and your nutrition, then you can be pretty sure that the vast majority, if not all of your weight loss is coming in the form of body fat, and that you aren't losing muscle throughout the process. You're usually not going to gain strength to the same degree while cutting as you would during a bulk, but you should still be aiming for progressive overload as best you can regardless. And clear strength losses should only be happening during more prolonged cutting phases where you're dropping a large amount of body weight or where you're cutting to a very lean body fat percentage. And even then, it still shouldn't fall much beyond maybe a couple reps for smaller isolation lifts and a very slight reduction in weight on those larger compound movements. So as we talked about in the bulking video last week, your training logbook should be given full attention as a progress tracking tool. Okay, you should be recording all of your exercises, weights, sets, and reps for each session. and then you should be striving to improve on those numbers whenever possible, or at least maintain them as a minimum. And if your strength is noticeably dropping throughout your cut, even though you're continuing to train with sufficient intensity, so as I talked about before, roughly 1 to 2 reps short of muscular failure on most sets, then that could mean a few things. Either your overall calorie deficit is too large, so your calorie intake is set too low, or you're performing too much extra cardio for the week, or a combination of both. Your macronutrient intake could be out of balance, like if you're heavily restricting carbs or you're not getting in enough protein or fat. And another possibility is that you might need to reduce your overall training volume or frequency, since you might be having issues with recovery if you're eating in a calorie deficit, but you're still on the higher end of the scale in terms of total training workload. So in that case, you could try cutting back on the total number of weight training workouts that you're doing per week. So that could mean going from 5 workouts down to 4 or 4 down to 3, or you could also cut back on the actual volume per session in terms of total sets, and usually a 20 to 25% reduction is a good place to start. So those are the 2 most important things to look at in terms of tracking progress during a cutting phase, okay? Your rate of overall weight loss and your strength levels in the gym. If those 2 factors are on the right track, then you'll pretty much know for the most part that your cut is moving along successfully. You're dropping fat at a significant pace and you're maintaining lean mass at the same time, or possibly even gaining some. And then beyond that, to fine tune things further, you can also add progress photos into the mix like we talked about in the last video. So you can take those once every 2 to 4 weeks, first thing in the morning, using the same lighting and angles each time. And then you can also take body part measurements as well. The standard areas for that are gonna be your neck, your chest, your upper arm, your forearm, thighs, calves, and then the most important one during a cut is going to be your waistline. And photos and measurements become especially important in the case of a recomposition, because they'll let you see how your levels of leanness and muscularity are changing, even though your body weight might be going down at a slower pace. And then lastly, of course, are body fat percentage readings. And the main reason why you'd want to know your body fat percentage is because that's going to help you determine how much of your weight loss is coming from fat versus lean mass. But as we just talked about, you can pretty easily determine this without actually needing to measure your precise body fat level. You can do it by just looking at your overall rate of weight loss, your changes in strength, your measurements, and your pictures. And then on top of that, getting accurate body fat readings is really difficult to do in the first place. There's usually a pretty big margin for error involved. And if you are getting incorrect or inconsistent readings, it could potentially throw your program off track. You know, maybe the readings are telling you that your body fat is stagnating when in fact it actually is decreasing, or that it's decreasing when it's actually not. And that could affect how you carry out your program moving forward. So I would say in most cases, tracking your precise body fat isn't really necessary, but if you do have a method in place that can give you consistent readings, so maybe a scale or properly used calipers or even a DEXA scan, then you can optionally use those to track the relative decrease from week to week, but just don't put too much stock in the objective reading itself, because it can easily be off by several percent in most cases. So just use it to give you a bit of additional insight into your overall cutting progress. And depending on the size of your calorie deficit, I would say somewhere around 1% body fat being lost every 1 to 2 weeks, that would be about right. So that covers the topic of proper progress tracking during a cutting phase. Hope you guys found these tips helpful. If you do want to grab a complete step-by-step fat loss program to actually apply these methods to that will maximize your overall rate of progress, including the workouts, meal plans, and supplement guides all laid out in a fully structured step-by-step manner that you can follow, then you can check out my body transformation blueprint by clicking here or by heading over to btblueprint.com using the link in the description box. If you enjoyed the video, as always, make sure to hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe to stay up to date on future videos. You can follow me on Facebook and Instagram as well. The links for that are also in the description box, and you can check out my official blog over at seannell.com for all of my latest updates. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.